My name is Joseph Carlson, and this is episode 29 of The Grief for Politics, and I'm here once again with Avin Carroll. Avin, how you doing?
I am doing good. How are you today, sir?
Good. Don't lie. We had some problems.
We've had technical difficulties, but hey, we made it. We're recording.
It's 2023. Welcome to technical difficulties and doing stuff online.
You know?
Yeah, this month it was my turn to pick, and I picked the corporate media. And I just have to say, we always have pre-shows and call each other and send each other stuff. And last night you called and said, why did you send me one of these things? And so I had to explain to you why. And then right before we just went over a thesis.
Yeah.
So
I actually have a better understanding of it after watching the Anderson Cooper clip that you sent me.
Yeah, because we're going to talk
go over.
Yeah, we'll go over the CNN town hall they had with President Trump. And Anderson Cooper did an apology video, basically. And I heard the intro to the apology, or the explanation, I'll say. And then I didn't realize, watching more of it this morning, or watching it, there was a panel. And I was like, oh, this isn't just like a 3-minute thing. This is like a 10-minute clip. And whatever, we'll get into it. So after I explained why I was doing what I was doing, what was your... Well, first off, what do you think about corporate media? I'll say that. Like, we've talked about it a little bit on the show, but we haven't had an episode about it.
We talk about it, I don't know, almost every episode or every other episode where we talk about media bias. And it's super, super common, right? Like, the media agencies, all of them are trying to generate money. They're for profit. There isn't a non-for-profit news organization out there that I'm aware of. They probably exist. You could say maybe BBC. But BBC has its own challenges, right? Now the government controls it. So how much are you willing to bite the hand that feeds?
Well, even independent people have said the BBC, yes, the government does fund it, but there is some editorial control still, because they don't get all their money from the government. Some of it is, so they still have a chance to be.
Right, but you still, it still creates that question of do I trust this source? Mm-hmm. Can I trust this source, right? The money's coming from the government. How willing are they to question the government? And that's not to say that they don't. Mm-hmm. I don't live in England. I don't watch all their news all the time on their own internal, what the BBC is reviewing, questioning. But, I have this V for Vendetta image in my mind of the media being in bed with the government.
I think some of that we'll talk about today, too, with the Twitter files. I don't want to get into a whole story of the Twitter files, but, I have it written down. Brianna Joy Gray has a podcast called Bad Faith, and I just sent you a 30-minute clip, which I think is a good kind of Brianna Joy Gray is on the Hill now with Rising, which used to be Sagar and Crystal Ball. And they, she's one of the new hosts on there, and she has her own podcast where she's more independent and talks about Rising, and interviewed Matt Taibbi about the whole Twitter files thing.
Right. And so, kind of my whole sort of viewpoint opinion is right, they're out to make money. So of course they're going to pander to their audience, be it riling the audience up to get engagement and attention, but without chasing them away, or specifically talking about things that are hot button issues, or without challenging the audience too much. Right. News doesn't really challenge its audience anymore, and that is a sad state of affairs. I thought the tweet that you shared from Jon Stewart with me was kind of funny, because he was like, it's really sad that we can't question our own beliefs. I was reading that going but people that listen to you aren't willing to question their own beliefs either, John. Not all. But
no, we'll get into that when we do the CNN, because I do want to read his tweet, because I screen grabbed it.
Right.
I was reading it and I was like, oh.
Right, because we're talking about it, we should share it. So anyway, the primary takeaway, right, is even what we think of as independent online news sources anymore still have audiences that they have to answer to, right? You really like watching Breaking Points with Crystal and Sagar, and even they have an audience that they have to pay attention to keep revenue coming in. Now, they can be as free and independent as they want to for as long as they can, but that's still going to have influence. Like, we don't want to challenge the audience too much because they will just stop paying.
Well, I think they're in a unique position because, they are kind of right and left, kind of like we are. I mean, obviously they're way more schooled because they've been in DC for a long time and been reporters there. And Sagar was, a White House press guy, and worked for Tucker Carlson. So, and I don't really know that much about Crystal Ball. I feel bad. But anyway, they've been in it a lot longer, and they can be, they can build an audience of like, some people probably come to Breaking Points and want Sagar's perspective, and some people come to Breaking Points and want Crystal's perspective. So they can do that of like, I don't really like what he's saying, I'm going to listen to her. I don't really like what she's saying, I'm going to listen to him. And then they debate back and forth, and then, there's totally pandering stuff, which we might, anyway, my whole idea is I understand that you have to get ratings, to have people watch your thing. But it seems like now we've just totally given that up. And it was even brought up in the Fox News trial with Dominion, where they the internal texts that were leaked between the hosts, like Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham, were like, they're going to go somewhere else if we don't carry water for this theory, and we don't want them to go somewhere else. And obviously Tucker Carlson was let go. Their ratings have dropped. It's like you see this thing of like, people are now worried about, they don't want to lose that money. And I'm actually thinking of another topic maybe for my next one. Anyway, so that's my whole thing is like, hey, I know this has always been about ratings, but I think even more so now, it's like just brazen. Everybody talks about conspiracy theories. This is just it's all out in the open now, with this kind of stuff. And so I think for me, that's what it was. It's like, oh, this is about ratings, just like you said. I think what we'll start with is, I just mentioned the Brianna Joy Gray. The podcast is called Bad Faith. The clip that I'm talking about, she interviewed Matt Taibbi, who is a big deal with the Twitter files. He basically got given things by Elon Musk and investigated other stuff and released these Twitter files. Their interview came out on March 6, 2023. It's like a 30-minute clip. Were you able to watch the whole thing, or did you just watch some of it?
The vast majority of it. I think I didn't watch like the last 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So, I got the vast majority of the kind of the point that she was making, Brianna was making, and Matt's responses back to it.
What did you think? I don't think I've asked you about.
I mean, we haven't talked about it since watching the clip. You've told me a lot about the clip.
Yeah.
Look, she really keeps hammering on him.
I watched it. This is the third time I've watched it, just because I was like, this is fascinating,
Right. So she really keeps hammering on him about like journalistic integrity, like digging in, or at least like owning, hey, I only have the information from them that they're willing to provide me, but here's what I see in it. Right. That was, I think, her real big point was like, it's fine to report on it. It is newsworthy, but you should recognize that like you're not getting information that is slanted to the other side.
Yeah, I mean,
one key takeaway that she keeps hammering it over and over and over again, so it becomes the narrative of it. And you and I have talked about this clip multiple times, but the one key takeaway is she keeps hitting on him for only getting a certain set of data, and it's limited and it's narrow. He had over 80,000 emails, and he had laptops that had been given to him that were completely like untouched.
Yeah, he said like untethered from what they...
Correct. He's also read through the Slack channels of the company, and I highly doubt that those Slack channels were, this is only on the right wing and this is only on the left wing. So she really keeps hammering on him for not digging into, well, hey, was this done on the left? Did they go after the Bernie bros? That was a big thing she talked about.
Yeah.
But I think he does a really good job of defending himself and saying, hey, look, like I had a lot of other sources, or like a ton of information from them. This wasn't isolated. I had 80,000 emails. Even she commented like, oh, wow, that does change things. I didn't realize you had so much information. But then they keep going on the dialogue, and then it's like she magically forgot that he brought that up. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think she, she wanted to dig into a particular point that she had and was focused on, here's the questioning line I want to go down, which is great. That's what she should do in an interview.
Again, I like her on, when I've seen her on Rising. I watched Bad Faith more, but
I thought it was a great interview. I really did.
She does this with a lot of people she agrees with and doesn't agree with, and she's on other. I just like the fact that it's like somebody doing that job can ask you questions like, why did you do this? And I took
Right.
some notes. So like she says, how much access do you have to this stuff, And also, what was the internal documentation you saw? You mentioned that he had all these emails, he had the Slack channels. But I think one of her points is, I bubbled this out. She said, Elon Musk's number one goal is he wants to make money off Twitter.
Correct.
Right? And so it is weird for someone to be like, hey, I have all this internal stuff from the company that I'm running. Do you go through this and tell me if there's a bias, and then I'll publish it on my whatever.
But
it's like,
how does that help him make money? If anything, it makes Twitter look worse.
It drives traffic. Because even if you
but
don't...
any negative news would drive traffic. It wouldn't matter what the narrative was.
Exactly. Because people are like...
how is that having a particular bias? Like, that doesn't bring up the particular bias. That just says, like, hey, I want to make something sensational. Here, take the data and make something sensational.
Yes.
This news would be sensational with or without Elon Musk. If it was an internal employee that had leaked all of it, it wouldn't matter.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want that? I'm agreeing with you. It's about engage. Like we know nowadays, it's about engagement. It's not about good or bad. And so and so destroys someone else. And so his whole thing is like, hey, do I want ABC or the New York Times to publish this? No, I want to publish it, and I want them to come to me, and I want all that to go through me. I want that. So of course, and that's my point. Is like it's about engagement. It's no longer about, hey, let's look at these Twitter files and see. It's like, hey, I'm going to have all this traffic coming to my website. I'm going to have everybody looking here for the Twitter files. The New York Times is going to have to come to my website to crop out the Twitter files and put it on there.
I mean, further that even further, right? Like, where is Tucker Carlson going for his new platform?
Yeah. I'm like, of course. Like, and Elon's like, yes. Like, he's like, just bring, no matter how, no matter how many eyeballs, because there's been a lot of talk about, can Tucker pull that audience somewhere? It's like, it doesn't matter. Like
he will pull an audience. How supportive that audience is, we don't know. But he will pull a big enough audience that it's going to generate money and revenue and views, no matter where he goes to, right?
Yeah. And my thing is
like on this point, right? Like I listened to an interview with a pretty successful YouTuber the other day, and one of the things that he brought up was like, it's all about engagement. And so in order to increase engagement, he was like, I don't care if it's good or bad engagement. The algorithm sees it and it promotes me. So he intentionally started like mispronouncing words or mistyping things in his clips just to get people coming in being like, that's not how you say procrastinate. It's not how you say, like he gave some words that he was intentionally saying wrong. Just so that people would comment on it underneath to get the engagement up.
Yeah, and I mean, and you and I have talked privately, and I think we've said this in the pod. Like, I don't want to use the word destroys in our clips because we don't destroy each other, and I don't want to caps it. But I understand.
Lib destroys conservative.
Even when I looked at the clip I sent you, like if you look at the, it's the caps. It's a capitalization. Is Twitter only biased against the right, and right is capitalized? So that's doing something to the algorithm.
It doesn't do anything to the algorithm. It does something to the human brain. It does increase engagement. It gets people watching the video, which then ramps it up, right? So how you title your videos in YouTube, and I hesitate because I'm like, how does this change in Facebook and other places? But even there, it matters because the text that's seen is going to draw viewers in and draw engagement in, right? And on the right, there is a very broad feeling that the general media, the majority of mainstream corporate media, is biased against it. So the Twitter files was a giant, like, see, we told you so for anyone on the right.
Correct. I didn't want to say right again. Correct. We just kept saying right over and over. Right.
Right.
So the things that Matt said, obviously, in that bad faith thing, he says that, every source has some kind of bias, and that's true. And I want to talk about that later because, we both go to places for our news and whatever. We'll talk about that later. But he's right. And he also says that he had to request things from them, but then you mentioned he got laptops. So then Brianna's question was, well, how do you know what they're giving you is the full breadth of what you requested? And you don't. And he said, I don't know. But I think her point is, if you're independently investigating something without their scope, of what they're handing you, you can kind of go into other areas, which it kind of sounds like he did anyway. But I get her thing. And her one big point, it was about now I wrote a timestamp down, about the 17-minute, 30-second mark. He admitted that Trump had made requests to take things down. There was the famous, I don't know if you heard about it, but Chrissy Teigen called him something. I'm not going to repeat it. And his administration reached out and said, take that down. So Brianna rightly points out, so what else was in that bucket? And Matt kind of says, well, it doesn't matter because this is the narrative that I'm going with. And she says, well, there's this other thing happening as well. So if you're going to talk about this narrative, you can't just mention, oh, by the way, Trump asked to take something. It's like, was that the only one? And so that's her thing, is like, if there is bias if there's bias going one way, what else is happening over here?
So without digging in, like having Twitter files be the whole topic of this episode, right? Yeah. One, he also brings up, right, like I'm chasing down this particular path. I'm not going to go off, and because he alluded that he may or may not be, like, he didn't want to burn bridges or overtax his ability to make requests. He didn't know how much he was going to get.
Yeah.
And so he's like, I'm not going to chase down Chrissy Teigen's thing because, like, who cares about that? And so to her point, right, that there might be more thread to unravel down that path. It's possible. It's true. And right, like we do know that Trump and his administration did ask stuff to be taken down, and we do know that it happens. But from the broader argument of like mainstream media and how this applies in corporate media specifically and in money generation, right? Like this does a really good job of showing sort of the back end of how our government and corporations interact with media agencies, right? Like if they're doing this to Twitter, which has a broad scope and a broad audience. What are they doing to ABC, NBC, CNN?
Yeah. Well, I mean, right? To be honest, like I'm not going to talk about one bias or another. I think it is foolish, and I think some people on the left have pointed this out about Matt Taibbi. If he thinks that if they're only going to Twitter and asking to take this down, like that is foolish. The FBI,
I don't think he does. I don't think he does for a second. He never alludes that. I just don't think that he was chasing down other sources. First off, CBS, ABC, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, like none of them are going to talk to Matt Taibbi at all about what's going on the back end. Like none of them are going to give him this access.
Yeah.
He was blessed, and for whatever reason, Elon Musk chose Matt Taibbi to be the person that he was like, hey, leak all the stuff to this guy. Right.
Well, it has a postscript. It's sad, but that's a whole nother episode of what happened with that. Like you said, we don't want to make this about the Twitter files.
Right. Like if you look at that, like he knew he had access in this particular case to this particular format. So, or company. So like, he's not going to go out and search others. It just exposes like, hey, this exists. And in the social media space that we trust social media a ton, like Americans get the majority of their news from their social media nowadays, which is kind of scary.
Well, that's
and I don't remember the statistic. It's surprisingly high.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, right, then bias should be brought front and center to people. Like, hey, social media companies, just like any other news agency, are privately held for-profit organizations that can drive their own narrative, and you should at least be aware when consuming it that there is bias and influence.
Yeah. No, that's true. I think that's what I was going to talk about more when we wrap up. But again, we don't want to turn this into the Twitter Files episode. So the next thing we got into was I didn't screen grab this. I paused the YouTube video. So Secular Talk is Kyle Kulinski. I always say his last name wrong. But he basically was going over a Fox News kind of poll that they were running on Fox News Business. With Varney, the guy's last name is Varney. Phil Varney. Anyway, I screen grabbed it because what I want to say is this: media always pushes a narrative, and we just talked about that. But what I think is fascinating is even Fox News, when they pull their own, well, who's ever answering the Fox News poll, it could be normies. But I think what's surprising is in this poll. This video came out 11 days ago, so I can't do the math. It came out May 3rd. Anyway, May 3rd this month. This one that Secular Talk's going over, that Kyle's going over. The poll doesn't have a date on it, but what I think is interesting about it is sometimes we always think these things are so prevalent with a conservative narrative or a liberal narrative. And I think with this poll, it shows that, like you always bring up in these episodes, the center is king. And like, I'll just read some of these poll things. So people want to reduce gun violence, and people are saying they're in favor of these things. One of them is background checks for guns. 87% of the people polled.
Right.
Enforcing existing gun laws, 81%. Legal age of 21 to buy all guns is 81%. Banning assault weapons is 80%. And more citizens carrying a gun, 45%. So that's under 50%. And I just want to say, it seems like these kind of things are taking even Fox News kind of by surprise. They mentioned in that clip, he's like, is this, he even says to his co-host or whatever, do we need to change our messaging? Because we're, more, and I think this really does push back on the thing that, like, everything's siloed, everything's, most people are just like, hey, I think I've read so much of the news, I think, yeah, maybe we should have universal background checks, maybe we should do this. And like the center is still, I think, king in a way, just like you say all the time, of like, yeah, like these are really bad takes from one side or another, but like people don't care about this stuff, just like how I feel about trans rights. I want trans people to be safe and happy. But on the list of things that are important to the country, besides those individuals having individual rights, which is important, lower on the list than, say, the economy, stuff like that.
To the majority of Americans, right?
Yeah.
But flip side of that, right? To people that have trans friends that are dealing with discrimination.
Oh, it's very important. Like,
family members, right? Like, it's also like directly impacts their day-to-day life. And so it's going to be far more important to them than,
I'm not trying to discount it. That I'm just saying
the flyover states where
right.
population density is low and they may not know a person.
Right. I'm just trying to say that, like, the national conversation, but I think what that clip shows is they even start talking about abortion later in the clip, where they have a poll about abortion and they say, I'm trying to see if I can find it.
And the humorous part of this is Fox's own poll of their.
Yeah.
Wow. They didn't say if it's their audience or not, but it's Fox News' poll, which means that poll was probably written with a right-leading bias.
Right. And then
because how a poll is written does lead its audience in a direction. It's kind of funny that they even brought it up on the air on their own channel, because
it
they're
kind of
scared
goes
of
against
losing
what they're
audience.
And the abortion thing, it's over half, 56%.
Yeah, it's 54%, I think, is what it was.
56% want it legal, 43% want it illegal. It's just like, I think there's this national conversation. Even some conservatives I listen to, Ron DeSantis signed that bill late at night for the 6-week ban. And even conservatives were like, that's a bad move. Like, they realize, that they can't.
Well, I mean, and the whole discussion of the 2022, like, red wave, right? The kind of broadly accepted discussion on why it didn't come across as a red wave is because abortion was such a huge topic, and that really brought out a lot of voters on the Democratic side, on the blue side of the voting aisle. And independents, it dragged them over too, because they're like, no, like, I don't agree with this. I'm not surprised that this is the outcome of that particular poll. Although I will say in that particular poll, right, the guest did bring up, like, this is a really nebulous question, right? Like, it's not asking any details or specifics. Like, it just says, should abortion be illegal or legal? Anyway, that's not the point. The point is, right, like, it's even Fox themselves has this coming out and kind of like how they should be reporting and how they should be adapting. And maybe this is a sign of Fox looking at, like, maybe we do need to sort of from the ground up sort of rebuild who is our audience.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's been so many reports about the age of Fox News' audience, about, and then to counteract that with the midterms, there's all this data coming out that younger and younger people are voting. And so it's like, are we out of step with what's the nation wants,
Right. And that's our government, right? Representative government, right? Like, we want, when we as Americans vote, the intention is that we are voting for politicians that represent our broad viewpoints, right? Like we're never going to match it up perfectly. It's very rare you're going to have a candidate that's perfectly matched up.
I don't think my whole voting life I've had one candidate. Man, 100%. I'm like 80. I'm like
right.
80%.
If you're lucky, 80, right? Like we look at Biden, right? The vast majority of Democrats would be like, he's not Trump.
Yeah, we got 60%. You know, like yeah.
You know, on a weighted scale of things that we could have, not being Trump is already 60%. So, like, you know, we're at 63.
Yeah, we're at 63%.
So, you know, it's interesting to see, right? The Dominion case has really brought front and center kind of where Fox News was and how they're pushing their particular viewpoints and their particular narratives. And I think it really also brings sort of to the public eye, we are watching Fox respond internally through what they're doing on the air. So this very well could be a sign of they're like running their own polls and then bringing them out to the public to be like, do you guys feel this way? How do we get a response? Like, what kind of response do we get to this particular episode?
And don't go to OAN. Don't go to OAN. Don't go to, you know, Newsmax. Don't do that. Don't do that. No. I do think what's interesting is, you know, there's always been this talk of how biased Fox is, which again, CNN is biased, ABC is biased, but everybody kind of knew, like, wait a minute, guys. And I think with the Dominion thing, what's incredibly illuminating is like, I knew it. You know, like these texts that came out, it's like, I knew they didn't like Trump, you know, but it's like, well, we don't want people to whatever. And I don't know. So I think that leads us to the CNN town hall that happened with Trump. Did you read the transcript? I read the transcripts because I didn't want to hear people laugh. The clips I saw, people were laughing and clapping, and I didn't want that to affect my whatever. So I read the transcript.
And it's somewhat humorous, or not humorous, but I guess kind of speaks to the point. The reason I didn't read the transcript is because of what, you know, Jon Stewart said in this tweet that we will share, which was, I didn't learn anything new about the president or his base.
Yeah.
I don't need to read through the entirety of what happened, right? Trump is Trump. Trump's gonna Trump, and his base isn't ever going to judge him. He is the Messiah.
Yeah. He says right here, Jon Stewart says, Dear TV, the problem with the Trump town hall wasn't platforming or a fragile, siloed audience unable to be exposed to newsworthy opinions.
Even though that's his audience too.
Yeah, opinions antithetical to their own. The problem was an event that was clearly negotiated to Trump's approval and owed to access. And the second one that I, let's see if I can, it's not opening. Hang on. There we go. We promise, good sir, we are no longer fake news, an enemy of the people. Let us prove it to you. We are fair and good, and we will do this however you would like. Just come back. I learned nothing from the town hall about Trump and his most ardent supporters I haven't known since 2016. I learned a lot about CNN. That's it. That's the thing. That's the thing.
But
right?
I agree with Anderson Cooper's response. You and I talked about this because you're thinking that CNN shouldn't have done it, but I personally think, why wouldn't they do it?
I don't know. Actually, you know, reading the transcript and listening to Anderson Cooper, I don't know if they shouldn't have done it. I don't know. I have mixed feelings.
You're just disappointed in the flagrant, like, yes, we gave him everything he wanted so he'd come on the show, right? So what do you expect? Well, what wouldn't you do, right? If you had someone that's like Anderson Cooper said, right? Trump is the forerunner to be the Republican nominee by a long shot.
You know, and I just.
What do you want us to do? Just not cover it?
I just said my point earlier. I guess it's all about engagement, right? Like their ratings are dropping. Hey, Trump's going to be on. He's probably going to say a bunch of lies, and then it'll get clipped out, and people like you and I are going to talk about it, and there's going to be people that are more influential that'll talk about it, and like, hey, we'll get a little juice out of this.
Are you saying we don't have influence, Joe?
Well,
let's be honest. Our biggest view is probably like 10. No,
man, we're in the 20s. The one we did, we got in the 20s. Well, I'll check again, but it was like 20. Anyway, we're double digits.
Wow.
But I think for me, it basically, like Jon Stewart just said it, like it exposes like, hey, because Trump openly called CNN like fake news and all this stuff, and all of a sudden, and then I think he just the day before got done with the civil trial with the sexual assault, was found guilty of that. He has the special prosecutor with the the classified documents is coming up. He's got the Georgia thing they mentioned. I read the transcript. I'm now 7 years older than I used to be, because even reading Trump ramble was like, oh, at least I don't have to hear the applause. Of people applauding his awesome jokes. I say in air quotes. But it, oh yeah, you gotta read. Anyway, to me, it is just, he said it all. It's like you capitulate. And then, like I said, Trump needed a little juice too, of like, hey, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to wow him a little bit. We're going to, all this stuff with the trials. I'm going to make a joke about it. I may libel myself again. Who knows? And then I'm going to be charming. I'm going to do the Trump thing. I'm going to go up there. I'm going to be boisterous, So they're kind of getting a little juice out of it. And he's gaining on not only Biden in the polls, but DeSantis. He's like booting him even harder into the.
I mean, I don't think DeSantis stands a chance. We need someone else as a Republican nominee to really come up against him, right?
Vivek
you and I have talked privately about another. What was that?
The guy's name Vivek Ramaswamy. He's one of the guys running that has been on shows, and he's even conservatives after they interview him are like, I don't know, man. Like I don't know. So yeah,
that's who's coming up besides DeSantis.
Yeah, Vivek Ramaswamy is one of them. I hope I said his last name right.
Check it out.
Yeah, he's coming up.
Goes to show how closely I'm following it. Just for the audience sake, I started a new job, and so I've been like way extra busy getting started in my new day job.
The good thing about,
because I don't podcast all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't, or you do. No, I think it just shows that again, this is about ratings. We need to do the thing. We need to get the juice. We need to get engagement. We need all this stuff to happen. And it's sad. It's really sad that, that happens, I guess that was my point. That,
I mean, yeah. It is, but it is the reality of it, right? Like gone are the days of having news sources that we just implicitly trust. Like as Americans, we as human beings need to question the source of our news now, where we should have always been doing it. And I think that's the key takeaway. And the reality of it is we're lazy. Like all of us, we're lazy. We just want to be able to consume the information and have the decision be laid out for us so it's really easy to get to. And so that's why CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, all the major news agencies have kind of grown up in popularity, because like I can relate to this viewpoint, and so I'm going to sort of just attach myself to it without doing any additional digging, without doing any additional research, which, God, I hate using that phrase, do your own research. Because basically no one that does their own research is actually doing real research. They're just watching someone else who's done it and made up their mind for them. So anyone that's actually like, I've really gone in and I've read multiple viewpoints and I've picked up any additional information, like, good on you. Most people don't. Most people go to news sources that they know, like, and trust, that are already in their bias, and they're not willing to challenge themselves. And guess what? We don't grow without challenge.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I do try to watch like right-wing stuff.
You do.
But
good job, Joe. Welcome to the minority.
I'm like one of the 1%. Anyway, I think that for me, it is about, even though I disagree with them, understanding why they're saying what they're saying. And sometimes it's indiscernible. I'm like, I don't understand why. Even after you explaining why, none of this.
Well, I mean, I think our episode where we talk about abortion, I think is a perfect example of that, right? Like, you will never understand why I have the viewpoint that I have on it. And
well, I mean, I don't agree with you. I mean, I understand it comes from probably a religious place, which is fine.
But again, like, you're already missing the point there. It doesn't even have anything to do with that. The religious place is that life begins at birth or conception. So an abortion at any point is murder, because the baby is alive, even when it's only 14 cells. That's where it comes from. So going back to that episode, just very, very briefly, my viewpoint on it is we will never agree. You and I will never agree. But to make society function as a whole, we just have to agree that neither side is ever going to agree.
You have to
find a compromise.
You have to agree to disagree.
Right. And then find a compromise.
Well, I think, talking about all this news, like you said, you try to find people you trust. I think
Right.
it's also not only that, but like realizing, because it sounds really dumb, but you know, everybody's going through life, and maybe you need to realize like these are my blind spots, or like what I'm biased about.
Right.
And I,
And be willing to challenge it, right? Like it's not just going to a source you can understand. It's going to another source that's maybe not aligned with you and saying, "Hey, is there common ground in here somewhere where maybe I can relate?" Or at the very least, you know, accept that they're a human being and that their viewpoint's based on their life experience, and that's how they worked into that particular viewpoint or ideology. Because decency between human beings is going away. The reason you and I even started this podcast, I think, is very much driven by the fact that both of us are really frustrated that in the United States, it's becoming us versus them, and we're dehumanizing the other side more and more.
That's why I wanted to cover this on the Grief of Politics. There's so many times, like, there's people in your life you just like maybe you can't talk to about politics anymore because it's like so you get into like screaming matches. Or you raise your voice, or you're like, wow, and they're thinking the same thing.
Like
about
our very first episode.
Yeah, like well, it was a rough thing. It was my first episode. Come on, no, but it's the idea of like you have to realize, like we talk a lot about, like, I'll just name drop it. We talk a lot about valuetainment, and I told you over the phone, I kind of came to this realization, like, listen, it's taken me a long time to watch that content, but I realized, their whole thing is making money. That's their whole thing, like bettering yourself through money. So like, I don't understand why I'm getting angry when they have somebody on who I agree with, like Sam Cedar, somebody that says like, hey, maybe we should tax the wealthy. Now you can totally disagree with that, but he lays out why. Sam Cedar does bring up, here's why, here's what we need to do. Here's what the percentage is. Here's how we raise money. And they totally push back. And I thought, why aren't they coming? Well, one, it's not a debate. You know, when you debate someone, I don't even know if you're whatever. You're debating pros and cons of something. When you have someone on to just share their viewpoint, they're like, this is what I think. We should tax the rich, and here's how it should work, right? They're not debating. Now, you can push back and forth, but, like, of course the people of Valuetainment aren't going to be like, man, Sam, you really changed my mind. Usually at the end of a Valuetainment episode, Patrick Bet-David will be like, I like you, and I want to have you back on, which I think is still an olive branch and a win of like, okay, you didn't totally upset me. Because I've seen some interviews where they yell at each other, and it does not go well. But there's some at the end where he's like, I'll have you back. You know, you're a good guy. You know, I don't agree with you, but I'll have you back. And I'm like, well, there's a win. You know, like at least then that he's like, hey, we're not going to agree on this whole economy thing, but let's go have tacos. Or, I don't know, something. You know, we're in Miami. We can find any
tacos.
Food. You know, I know. We're going to have tacos. Yeah, that's what I said. But we're in Miami. We could get any food we want. What kind of food do you want? You know, stuff like that.
Right.
So,
and you know, that's true for all media sources. Actually, Valuetainment is a perfect example too, right? So the whole theme of this is corporate media and kind of where we're at. And you know, the Twitter Files does a great job of sort of bringing up the question, the unasked questions, right? The what's the one called that talked about Fox News Secular?
Oh, Secular Talk, yeah.
Yeah, Secular Talk, right? Like that video clip.
Kyle Kulinski.
Like does a great job of bringing up like major news agencies sort of trying to pivot, right? Like we see CNN in the town hall with Trump. Like they're all sort of in this phase right now where they're trying to figure out new news because people are moving to alternate news sources. They're doing things like breaking points. They're going to Valuetainment. They're going to alternate places to get their news because they don't trust the major news agencies. The major news agencies at this point have all sold out. And the general broad kind of viewpoint within the population, because it's becoming a younger and younger population that's grown up with this, right? Like they're questioning, they're doubting, they're moving on to other places. But like Valuetainment, breaking points isn't so much maybe because kind of what their mission and goal is, but like Valuetainment or any other source like it, Secular Talk, right? Like they have an agenda. They have a viewpoint of what they want in their head, what they're driving to in their own viewpoint, and they're moving towards it. These aren't professional journalists.
Well, I mean,
maybe Secular Talk, maybe, but that's not my point. My point is that people are getting their news nowadays online from these people that maybe actually have some good viewpoints and are talking about things that are very important, but they're not journalists. They're not digging. They're adding tons and tons of editorial with very little information.
Yeah, I mean, some of that I don't think is bad though. I think to just say, "Hey, did you see this clip?" And if you again,
Hmm.
if you recognize the bias within yourself and say,
Most people don't.
I've clicked on this leftist video, and I'm going to see this leftist person talk about what the crazy thing the conservatives did," then I know exactly what I'm getting. I'm not going to be like, "Wow." If one of the leftists that I clicked on and they were talking about that Ron DeSantis anti-abortion bill, and they're like, "Hey, he brings up a lot of good points," I'd be like, "What?" Like it wouldn't make sense, but again, that's why I go to the other, like the Blaze. I haven't watched the Blaze as much, but
And you do. Most people don't. And I think that's the really difficult thing for you and I, because you and I are perfectly capable of questioning our own beliefs, recognizing our own bias, and pushing through to at least have an understanding of the other side. If not, at least question, like, maybe I'm wrong on my viewpoint on this, right? Um, I don't mind doing that. It's uncomfortable because, like, oh man, what else could I be wrong on? Kind of comes
yeah,
in, and that doubt of oneself.
it's
But on
bad.
the same note, the majority of people, not Americans, people don't do that. It's uncomfortable. They don't want to put the time, effort, energy into it. They have bills to pay. They have work to get done. They're burnt out from their job, and so they're trying to decompress and move on.
Yeah,
So the news
yeah.
that they
Plus,
get, they want to
they're
be able to digest it easily. It's like baby food,
yeah.
and move on.
People have brought it up too. Like CNN and Fox are easy, right? CNN is in airports. Like you click it on, you whatever. I don't have to. These guys are telling these people are telling me headlines. We're
Mm.
good. Fox News. These people are telling me headlines. Great. I don't have to go anywhere else. I don't have to do like to get dug into an independent whatever, to be a patron, to participate in Patreon, to become a member of a channel, all that stuff. You're more dug in, and it takes more time to
Yep.
find those people,
Yep.
and that's where algorithm comes in, which sometimes they're good and sometimes they're bad. You
Yep.
click on one person and you're like, "Oh, I like this person, whatever," and then it'll be like, "Hey, if you like this person, you like these." And sometimes you get a thing and they're going, "What?" Or you click on a video because you want to know, like, "Oh, let me hear the other side of this," and then it's like, "Oh, you want to hear all this other stuff?" It's like, no, whatever. I think that is harder, and it takes even more engagement to be like, I want to seek out something else, and it's
Right.
harder for people because, like you said, people are tired. They just want to sit home at the end of the day, clean up a little bit, spend time with their family, make dinner, and then
Right.
go to bed. And so
Watch a little
yeah,
TV, decompress, maybe read a
yeah,
book,
yeah.
and then go to bed.
Play a game.
Or, pursue a hobby, get work done
Mm.
around the house, whatever it may
Yeah,
be, right? Like we don't want to spend the time digging in to really, really understand because it's difficult and it's challenging and, and a lot of the times it's depressing.
yeah. I
Uh,
think one thing I will say about like getting entrenched in media, Jon Stewart did say something in an interview when the whole Joe Rogan thing came up a while ago. I think with ivermectin, and he's
Robert McCullough,
yeah.
the
Well,
doctor that,
Jon Stewart basically just said, "Listen, I don't think canceling someone is the answer.
Mhm.
Engagement is always the answer. It's pushing back against." Like actually going on Joe Rogan's show and saying, "Well, why do you think that?" Because guests have done that to him before,
Mhm.
um, and it's the idea that um, again, you have to realize your own bias, but when you're pushed back, not get angry. Just as I get older, I find that listening is one of those skills they try to teach you in school that does take a long time to stick. The idea of sitting there and really listening to someone.
Mhm.
And one thing I heard about, I think it was video game dev, which kind of just it was a point that I think transfers over to life in general, which is when people complain about a specific thing, like in a video game, sometimes they're not complaining about that thing; they're complaining about the system around what is happening. So, like, hey, I didn't get rewarded when I did this thing. That's not the thing that they're mad about. They're mad that they didn't get rewarded in general. And so it's like when you complain about uh, some minor thing like legalizing weed, like they shouldn't do it, it's the devil's lettuce or whatever. Maybe you're just angry and that's what you're choosing to focus your anger on. I think there's been a big critique of the right of like, well, we don't really have a question for inflation or whatever, so we're going to talk about trans rights. Like we're mad about other things, but we can't change that. So we're going to focus on this marginal thing, you know, and we're going to rally people around this marginal thing. And I think I'm seeing a lot of that, I think, on the right and even on the left of it's not enough. You're not an activist enough. You're not vocal enough about people's rights. And on the right, it is, man, we really got shellacked about abortion. Can't really talk about that, what we really want to do. Why don't we talk about this other thing about wokeism, you know, which in my opinion is something kind of on the margins. It's like, but we can really talk about wokeism a lot and again, get engagement and stuff like that. I think all that kind of stuff.
Right. Because it gets engagement, it gets people involved and it drives. And it's unfortunate, but like real, maybe not real news, but like heavy, meaty, weighty news topics are hard and they take time and they challenge us. And yeah, you can rile up a base that way too if you're not a lazy journalist and you actually really want to like talk about it and be passionate about it. But it's really easy if you're, you know, Ron DeSantis to get a lot of people worked up, get a ton of press by doing a 6-week abortion ban, hammering on
11,
abortions,
like 11 at night or whatever.
hammering on wokeism, right? Like you can really rile up a base and get a lot of support and publicity and news doing that. And so it's easy. It's lazy.
Yeah. So what do you, we're on towards the end here. So what are your big, did I satiate you when I told you why I selected these things, that it makes sense? You know,
it makes more sense now. Yeah, initially when we discussed it, no, but now I get it. I even told Lisa last night, I was like, I didn't get why Joe sent this to me, but now I do.
Oh, you've been illuminated. Yeah. I mean,
maybe
is there any kind of, like, I know, you know, you've been busy stuff with your new job. Is there people that you look for like independent stuff? Like, we really liked Dory Monson, but he passed away recently. I don't know who's taken over. Did someone take over his show?
I don't know. I'm not listening to the radio that time of the day right now, so I
didn't even know.
I'm sure someone did.
I would listen to him and be like, this is great. And then I just saw the billboard that he passed. Like I was driving by I-5 and I think, was he Como?
I could have sworn I told you.
Or maybe I mentioned the
Cairo Radio.
Yeah.
No. I mean, before any billboard would have gone up, right? Like it was a Seattle Times article. I mean, he's been a mainstay in the Northwest for years. And anyone that's not here in the Pacific Northwest, Dory Monson was a radio host. Is definitely more conservative. He actually did all of the Seahawks radio stuff on Cairo Radio here in Seattle for years. Did post-game shows, talked to Pete Carroll after the games.
Yeah.
He lost that because he did a tweet that was questioning trans rights or trans people, and actually got taken off the radio for a little bit. Cairo did put him back on, but he wasn't given access back to the Seahawks anymore. They wouldn't let him back in. So
maybe it was a Seahawks thing too, not just Cairo, but maybe the Seahawks, you know, they have.
No, I'm sure that was the Seahawks. I'm sure the Seahawks were like, we don't want Dory anymore. Yeah, we just don't want anything to do with it.
Because they have their own guidelines, right? And they're like, he violated our guidelines.
Right.
You know,
so the point being, right, like is that Dory Monson has sort of been a conservative mainstay in the Northwest for a long time. The thing about Dory is he was actually pretty centrist. You know, if I'm listening to someone on the radio or looking at someone that's maybe right-leaning compared to me that I really like and really trust, it would actually still be Cairo Radio. And it's, I can't remember his last name, Dave in the mornings.
I don't listen to a lot of morning radio.
Anyway, on the morning radio show, it's Dave Ross and Colleen. Can't remember her last name now. And Dave Ross, you know, he ran for governor at one point. He is Democratic, but right. He's very centrist and he's very reasoned in his viewpoints. And I actually really appreciate it. He does a good job of articulating. I mean, he's an older journalist. He's been doing it for 30, 40 years, right? Yeah. So he's learned to be measured and clear and articulate. They do a good job of it. So that's, you know, someone on the right that I have a deep respect for.
I'll have to actually check that out. I'm sure they have an app or something.
You're on the road when he's on, Joe. The show starts at like 5 a.m.
Hey. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Well, for me, I think shout out just Secular Talk is good. If you click on that, you'll probably Breaking Points is good because it's a little bit more balanced. Some of their debates I wish they would put on YouTube, but I think they paywall those. It seems like a year later they're like, "Hey, remember our debate about gun control a year ago? We'll put that up." But I understand. Again, it's hard. People only have a finite amount of money. My wife and I sat down last weekend and went through our whatever, and I reduced some subscriptions and stuff like that. And it's hard. You want to get news from people you trust, but it's almost like the breaking of cable TV of like now instead of having one place to just turn on cable and watch Fox or CNN or whatever, you got to find breaking points and you have to find
got 100 channels you can go through, and 12 of them might be news, and you can kind of pick and choose, right?
Yeah, and then some of them you have to pay for, and then there's what's the Substack is the new one, which I was looking at to put our podcast on, but it seems like it's only paid. Maybe I don't understand enough about Substack. And some of the people that do paid, it's like $20 a month just for this one Substack channel, and I'm like, you guys have to be like a news organization, like cranking out so much news. Like for someone to put that kind of money down, like that's crazy. I don't know. So I guess that leaves the end of our episode. I don't, and I don't know. For me, you have to. My thing is again, you have to realize how you're biased and push back on yourself a bit about. I'm going to watch this. I'm going to watch that. I'm going to try to be a little bit more whatever because. As Sam Cedar, I like Sam Cedar a lot. He said something one time that he will go on these right-wing shows and debate people, and people will call in. He used to do a radio show. Now he does it on YouTube, but people still call in. And he says, for me, it's always been engagement. And if I can just get one person that is listening that doesn't agree with me to go, wait a minute, he has one good point. Maybe that's enough for them to be like, oh, maybe I need to listen to this other side. And I think for me, that's why I do it. If I listen to it and say, well, they have one good point. At least I understand where they're coming from. And, you won't get so negative when you're like, okay, I understand why they're bringing that up or saying that, So yeah. So, go ahead.
Oh, so, I really like this particular topic and this episode, right? Like the whole reason we even do the grief of politics is because of the grief that we have related to how news is consumed, what news is presented, and how societally we're moving and reacting to it, right? Like I think that's a huge part of it. And I thought this particular topic, right, this conversation has been great because it really highlights that. And it leaves me with an ask for our audience, anyone that is watching, which is recognize your bias, own it, own who you are, and challenge it. I would ask you to challenge yourself because it's the only way you can grow. When you listen to a left-leaning person next time, you're watching a left-leaning report, try to be open-minded. Try to ask yourself, how do I relate or where do I relate? Because that allows us to have a more perfect union, as our Constitution says, right? If we aren't willing to sit down and talk to one another and we aren't willing to listen to each other in good faith, then we're doomed.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I think, too, is a test, like maybe there's a right-wing person or a left-wing person you really like and try to search out on the other side for that same story to see how they cover the same story. Now, the problem is what I've noticed, they don't cross over a lot. You're like, let's see what Fox News is saying about this critical thing about conservatives. Oh, they're not even talking about it, or, like it'll happen on the liberal side. But there is some smaller news stories that you can click on and be like, how is CNN reporting this? Now, how is Fox News reporting this? What is the whatever? And I don't know. So anyway, is there anything you want to, well, before we end the show, I want to say, have you picked a topic next month? Do you know what we're going to talk about? Have you decided? Cause it's your turn to pick.
You and I were talking a couple weeks ago, about all the news.
Bring up the list. I got the list.
I think you put it on the list, but honestly, I'm pretty sure I remember this one off the top of my head. It's miraculous.
I usually have to read the list. Yeah.
The recent news with shootings and gun violence has just sort of brought it to the forefront again, right? Like what happened in Texas recently, and I've driven by that outlet mall so many times I can't count because when I lived in Dallas, it was right off the road. I went and I bought tennis shoes at the Nike outlet there, right?
I think it would be good because we talked about Second Amendment rights and what citizens have for rights, but I don't think we've specifically talked, and we've talked about police, but I don't think we've actually had an episode on gun violence, like specifically about gun violence.
So maybe not necessarily the Second Amendment right aspect of it, I mean, it's going to bleed in, it's going to come up, but I think it's a really good hot button topic for right now with what's going on. Admitting, like, we're already a couple weeks behind when this episode comes out, and then we're going to be another month behind that. But just for those watching behind the curtain, right, this is how we're doing it. We do these podcasts once a month. So I think gun rules and regulations, not specifically related to the Second Amendment,
so do you just
even though that'll come up.
Gun violence or
gun violence? I don't know if gun violence is necessarily, but like gun control.
It is a thing.
It is a thing, but that's not like in my head where I'm trying to come up with the discussion of gun violence. Like, we know gun violence is a thing, but like, how do we react to it as a society? So that's why I say more of a slant on gun control versus gun violence. I mean, we could sit down and talk about gun violence all day long.
Or like, I mean, it kind of is in our wheelhouse, the idea of politicizing a tragedy. You know, like
also true.
It happens on left and right all the time. Of you hear it on both sides. Hey, can we not politicize this? You know,
right. People died. It doesn't need to be about politics, right? Like, let's be there and be supportive. Let's do the right thing. But specifically, right, like we're talking grief politics, and what is the political response of our government to these types of gun violence things? Like, gun violence is an action, gun control is the response to it.
Yeah, or reform or lack of reform is action or inaction. You know, inaction is still inaction in a weird way of like not.
I mean,
something is...
this hot button got hit for me in that Secular Talk video too, because he talks a little bit about gun violence and gun control briefly in that little clip too. And I just had this like knee jerk, like, it's not how it works.
Yeah. Well, I think he did bring up a good point about, I think more and more people are seeing these stories and they're like, this could be my family. You know?
Right. And he did.
So yeah.
And that is heartening. That is heartening to me that Americans are willing to pivot their viewpoints. They're not going to be so deeply ingrained that they can't change. We all have viewpoints in our lives and our mindsets and our worldviews that won't change. No amount of challenging will change it unless something catastrophic rips us out of that viewpoint.
That is very true. Yeah.
But, right, like, that makes me feel better that as Americans as a whole, right, like, maybe there's fewer of those deeply ingrained beliefs and we're willing to question things a little bit more, or at least give some ground and some leeway. Recognizing that it could be your own family member is, I think, a large reason why gay rights and gay marriage has become something that has been resolved. I don't want to say resolved. That's probably not accurate. It seems greatly like improved in our lifetime.
Because more people are like, no, I'm gay, and you're like, oh, like, you know.
Right. But it's just not a thing anymore, right? Like, it's just part of life. But when you and I were in high school,
for most people, I would say it is. I'm sure there's still some people out there that are like, what is going on?
Society at large. And definitely it's still a thing, right? Like, even Ted Lasso in their most recent episode is addressing it. Which, if you don't watch it, I'm not going to do any spoilers, but it's addressing that. Their most recent season is kind of addressing that struggle still that gay people still have in the world and how they're viewed. But it's become far more common and accepted. Whereas, like, when you and I were in high school, you know, and not to offend anybody, but when you and I were in high school, if we didn't like a thing, that's how we would describe it. Oh, man, that's gay. Yeah. And now we've grown up as a society to be like, maybe that's not the right way we should be addressing a negative thing.
Yeah, I did.
That's definitely not the way we should be addressing a negative thing. Like, that's not the right way to do it.
Yeah.
And so but we can make that in other areas too. Yeah. We can grow in other areas too.
Yeah, all this stuff changes, you know?
Right.
So what do you, before we leave, what do you want to plug?
Well, I mean, the same thing I always plug, right? Like, check me out on Your Agent Guide on YouTube. If you're, buying a home, selling a home, you need a real estate agent anywhere in the United States, I can definitely help you do that. No cost to you. Agent matching service. I got my real estate license specifically to help my friends and family have a real estate agent that they could trust that will actually do the job, not just sell them that they can do it, but actually do it.
And again, I've said it many times when I meet it, I like the fact that you do shorter content, you can like get in and out, you have bullet points. Because I have tried to click on those longer videos from other YouTube creators and I'm like, do I need a graph or I can't. I just want to watch a 7-minute video of somebody telling me the difference between renting and buying a condo. There, we're done. Yay. Yeah. And then once in a while you're on my podcast, Gaming with Grief. I'm making some changes lately to it. I got to do some editing tonight for the next one, but yeah, I'm trying to improve my thumbnail game. we'll see if that works.
And engagement, right? I want to promote engagement. If you're watching either of the podcasts, please be engaged, right? That's the name of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Leave a review, leave a rating, negative or positive.
Well, you know what? We'll take the 1 star because it's 1 more star than we have right now. So is that how it is? Is it like Mario Brothers? You can just add up all the stars you get, I think, maybe? Probably not. Okay.
I don't know.
Can't get all the stars. Yeah, I think that's it this month. We'll talk to you guys next month. And Avon, we're going to talk about stuff. We haven't decided the title, but yeah, we'll see you guys again next month. Bye.